you for joining us today. I find it's going to be very informative from the information that's been shared so far. And so I'd like to introduce Lauren Barker, who is the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Young Professionals, commonly known as CCYP. All yours, Lauren.
Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here representing CCYP in this really great collaboration with the Cape Women's Coalition. With the majority of the Cape's towns operating under the town meeting form of governance in some form or fashion, it's become a very important point of conversation between CCYP and CWC. How can we help to encourage and really promote the importance of this form of governance here on the Cape, especially during this unprecedented time of gathering restrictions, social distancing, and modified operations on all fronts. So today we'll be talking about this and why town meeting matters during this time, especially now. The program today, as you all are probably aware, is presented through this collaboration between the Cape Women's Coalition and the Cape Cod Young Professionals and the CEO. So I want to share with you just a little bit about both organizations before we get started. The Cape Women's Coalition is a nonpartisan coalition working as an agent of change to encourage and support women to enter public life and become public leaders through civic engagement. And they work to educate the public about the benefits of balanced decision-making and leadership at all levels, but especially on more involvement in government and civic life and why that's important. CCYP, or Cape Cod Young Professionals, is a nonprofit 501c3 that's based here on Cape Cod. We serve Falmouth to Provincetown, all 15 towns on the Cape, and we work to connect, engage, and advance the young workforce and leaders of Cape Cod. We work especially in the areas of career development opportunities, community connection, community building, and civic engagement. And this is the point where CWC and CCYP have had a number of collaborations to date, and we hope to have more moving forward. This one today. You can find out more about both organizations through our websites, and I think at the closing comments, Sue will go over a little bit of how to get in touch with us and how to find what we're up to. So today we're joined by two really great speakers, subject matter experts on the topic of town meeting on a couple of different fronts. We have with us Dan Horgan, who is the town moderator for the town of Falmouth, or I'm sorry, for the town of Yarmouth. Sorry, Dan, I know that. Got ahead of myself a little bit with my talking and brain didn't match up. So Dan and his wife, Cindy, just a little bit about Dan. They've been living on the Cape in Yarmouth since 1987, have raised 5 children together, and Dan first ran for selectman back in 2001 and served for 4 years. In 2008, he ran for the Yarmouth moderator's position and has held it for 12 years, but he will be sadly stepping down in June. We're sorry to lose him. Dan has, on a side note, collaborated with CCYP to present our mock town meeting program and is a wonderful subject matter expert on town meeting and the mechanics of how it works. We also are joined today by Michelle Randazzo, who is an attorney and member at the law firm of KP Law. She has 27 years of experience as a public sector attorney with expertise across a wide variety of general legal issues, including town meeting, municipal charters, bylaws, conflicts of interest, public records and open meeting laws, and municipal finance, as well as labor and employment issues. So quite a bit of expertise on the legal side, and we'll be touching on that a lot today, I believe. So we are very pleased to have you both today, and I think at this point we are going to turn it over to Dan first to talk with us a little bit about how town meeting works. So thank you both for joining us, and Dan, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Lauren. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan Horgan, and I am the moderator for the town of Yarmouth. This is my first time using Zoom, so bear with me. It's a little awkward, and I promise the ladies I won't touch any buttons or do anything fancy, very much like I promised Cindy that I won't go near the TV clicker at home. My job today is really to just kind of talk about town meeting, its importance, a little bit about how it works, and then really underscore the importance of our full participation in town meeting and our desire and need to go out and bring others back. Because one of the things we're having experiencing right now is that not enough people are going to town meeting. If you're going to town meeting, thank you. You have my appreciation and gratitude. I'd ask you to go out and try to find others, especially young people. I've made it a point of trying to bring young people back to town meeting so that they can learn really what true democracy can look like when it's done right. And town meeting is a wonderful forum for that. Yeah, our young people can learn about leadership. They can learn about civic responsibility, and they can find their voice, which I think is so important today in terms of being able to speak in front of people, to people of power, representatives, and try to communicate what their needs are and what their feelings are on major issues that affect them. So as I said, I've been a moderator now for 12 years. I know there's better moderators that could have come and been a part of this meeting today, but there's few of them that are as passionate as I am about bringing people back, because our town meetings are suffering right now with a lack of participation. And so I want to reclaim that. I want to reclaim our voice and our power to determine what goes on locally. Town meeting has been going on since the 1600s. It's a New England construct. It's been around since the very beginning. One of the things that I really love is in the old days, they used to actually fine you if you didn't go to town meeting. I love that. I wish we could do that today, fine people, because they thought that it was a moral duty to go to town meeting. And they thought that the right was too precious to squander. Too precious to squander. And I think that speaks to all of us today. Most of us, I think we all take pride in the fact that we live in a country that's a democracy. Democracy is probably the fairest, the most inclusive, and most equitable form of governing a people that I think our world has come up with. And yes, sometimes we're frustrated and disillusioned by what's going on at the federal level, sometimes even at the state level. But if you really want to see how true democracy can work and how it can really enliven people's understanding, go to town meeting, learn how to take your voice back, and hopefully we can take that wherever we go, in the state or the federal level. So why do we have town meetings? Well, the general laws tell us that every town has to have a town meeting just in order to, if nothing else, pass the operating budget for your town. So the operating budget is an amount of money that allows the town to do all of the things that a town does. It funds all of the different departments that you use on a daily, weekly, a monthly basis. And it provides an awful lot of services that you're utilizing. So that needs to be actually discussed and passed by the people of town meeting, which is pretty amazing when you think about it, the power that we have. There's a lot of other budgets that are discussed as well. School budgets, how important is that? DPW, library budgets, recreation, all of the services that we utilize in our towns day in and day out are all discussed and adjusted and passed at town meeting. So when do we have our town meetings? Well, usually at the beginning of the year, the selectmen, they start gathering the items that they want to bring to town meeting, and they will collect them, and each of the items is called an article. So they'll reserve spaces for all of the different things that they want to talk about. And the budget is one of them, but there's always a whole bunch of different things. And they collect all of that and they put it into a booklet, and that booklet is called the warrant. So when they're all done and they think they've got everything that they want to talk about at the town meeting, they close the warrant, they print it, they send it off, and we're ready to go. So who gets to go to town meeting? Well, my town, actually, Yarmouth, has an open town meeting, and we can talk about different kinds of town meetings later. But in my town, all you have to do is be a registered voter. So if you're registered, you can go to town meeting and participate as fully or as little as you want. And if you're not registered, go down to your local clerk's office in the town hall and get registered. Because When you go to town meeting, you've got the ticket to one of the best shows that happens all year long in your town. When you go to town meeting, you're going to meet some of the smartest, some of the most articulate, and caring, and generous people that your town has to offer. You're also going to meet some of the wackiest and some of the most narrow-minded and ornery people that your town has to offer. But they're going to be there too. And they are going to have their say. And some of them more than you want, to be quite frank. But through that interchange, the articles are discussed and you're educated on what is going on in your town, and you're given an ability to have your say in your vote. So what happens when you go to a town meeting? Well, you learn how they are going to spend your tax money, where it's spent, why it's spent. One of the great things about town meeting is you get an opportunity to actually participate and get up and talk with your friends and your neighbors and your elected representatives about the things that are important to you, the things that affect your family, the things that affect your business. If the elected representatives, and at a town meeting, you'll often see them right up there on the stage, if they happen to disagree with you or are suggesting something other than you think the town should be doing, you get an opportunity right there to talk directly, face to face with your representatives and ask them why they feel the way they do and why they're voting the way they are. And if you don't like it, you can also take that other wonderful right that we have in democracy and use your vote and speak loudly with that. But it is an opportunity to make your town representatives responsible and articulate what positions are taken and why they're taken. I told you before that one of the great things about town meeting is it's a great opportunity to learn about your town and the people in it. Yes, many of us have fears of getting up and speaking at town meeting. I was one of them. I was petrified the first few times I got up and spoke. But much of what you do at a town meeting is listening to the explanations of what the articles are discussing, listening to the conversations that take place both for and against the article, listening to the questions that are asked. Maybe you have some questions that you want asked. And then approaching all of that information with an open mind, casting your vote, and letting your voice be heard. As you'll find out, there's lots and lots of committees that exist in a town. And one of the great things about town meeting is they get to bring stuff to the town meeting as well. And the things that are of interest to them are also made articles and are brought to town meeting, and you get an opportunity to vote on them. So say you're an avid reader and something on the library comes up. The library board will bring that to you. Say you are interested in the safety of your town. Well, you're going to pass on the police budget and how well they're able to do their job. Maybe you're concerned about how fast an ambulance is going to be able to get to you. All of these things and more are discussed in detail, and you're given full opportunity to ask questions and listen and learn and cast your vote. As you can imagine, meetings that consist of this many people have a lot of rules, and the moderator is charged with these rules to try to direct the conversation and to really be fair. I think, most of the rules are designed to move the meeting along, to bring it to a vote, and give people an adequate opportunity to speak their hearts to whatever it is that they're interested in. I love the rules in one respect. They're really there to protect the minority interests. A lot of people don't realize that, but the rules are designed specifically to be fair and, I think, be respectful. And remember that we as elected representatives are serving the people in the audience. It's their turf, not ours. And I love that about town meeting. Town meetings, though, they're confusing sometimes, especially the first few times you go. So don't be afraid to ask questions. the Board of Selectmen are up there. They work for you. Ask questions if you have them, if you don't understand anything. The Finance Committee is another group that you'll often see at a town meeting. They'll sometimes be up on the stage, and they're the committee that gets into the nitty-gritty of all the different budgets in the town to a level that amazes me and confuses me. But you can ask them questions also. Oftentimes the town manager and all of his department heads will also be at the town meeting. So anytime you have any kinds of questions at all of those people and more are available for you to ask your questions and try to get a better perspective before you cast your vote. And then finally, please talk to your moderator. Raise your hand and go to a microphone and say, Mr. Moderator, can you please explain how I get this done or how I accomplish this? Any moderator worth his salt is going to take that opportunity, stop and educate the entire audience, because you're not the only one that has that question, I guarantee it. And so it's a great opportunity for your moderator to just go over the rules, because town meeting is not an insider's game. It should never be that. And to be fair, in the past, I've seen town meetings operate that way. But the rules are there for everybody, and a good moderator and a good citizen will make people ask or answer questions so that they can participate as fully as they want. The best way to learn about town meeting is simply by going. Go and watch and listen. And after you've listened to all of the arguments regarding each of the items that are being covered, vote your conscience. Vote what's right, not necessarily what's right for you, but what's right for everyone. And that's great about town meetings, because you get to see how things affect other people, not just yourself. So now that we see why town meetings are so important, we may be scratching our heads and wondering, why aren't people going anymore? Why are people not even voting in our towns anymore? Why are our citizens so disengaged? Maybe most of them are just too busy working several jobs. We've fragmented our lives to a large extent and made it difficult to focus on any one thing and participate in any one thing. A lot of people feel that town government, state government, federal government just doesn't work anymore. And they're throwing their hands up and they don't want anything to do with it. As a parent, I used to go to town meeting and I'd look around and I'm looking and I'm saying, where are all the other parents? I go to a sporting event and I see all the parents at a sporting event, but I don't see them at town meeting where the school budget is discussed, where the very quality of the education that is going to be offered to their child over the coming year is determined. And I don't see them there. It's astounding. And so maybe it's not so much a question of time. I think it's a question of how we use it. I think it's a question of priorities. The main thing, however, the main thing that we all have to keep in mind is that town meeting is going to go on whether you show up or not. And people who show up are the ones who get to make the decision. Whether that be 50 or 5,000, they are going to make decisions that have a major impact on the quality of your life. The rate of taxes that you're paying and the kind of services that you have available to your town. What are some of the other benefits of town meeting? One of the great things is you get to see really what your neighbor thinks about things. You get to hear them talk about what's of concern to them and what their priorities are, and you get to see how they vote. And that's really quite eye-opening at times. But remember, they also get to see how you vote and any comments that you have. Another benefit of town meeting is you get to see just how many committees and groups are involved in your town. There are so many volunteers in every single town that really make the town work. And they exist for almost every imaginable reason. Everything from cemeteries to libraries to schools to flower committees. Everything that your town offers, there's a committee there that is passionate about it and looking for your participation. So you can learn an awful lot about what's available in town, and hopefully at some point you'll want to volunteer and become a part of that. Because again, the people who are serving on these committees are the most committed, the most wonderful people that your town has to offer, because they are committed in making their neighborhoods better and making their citizenship and their communities all that they can be. It's an amazing experience, and it encourages us to be our best selves. One of my favorite writers is a woman that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Her name is Brene Brown. And I've read most of her books, but she has a couple of quotes that I wanted to pull out today about town meeting. She says, sometimes the bravest and the most important thing that we can do is just simply show up. Just simply show up. She tells us we have to dare sometimes to show up and let ourselves be seen. And sometimes we have to show up and we have to do what is right. We have to speak what we feel is right, even when it's hard, even when we know we're going to be criticized for it. I'd like to give you an example, a quick example if I can on that. As I said, I'm a father and 5 kids in the public school system. I was interested in how that all worked. And I found out in my town that we used to have the vote on the budgets at the polls first, and then we'd go to town meeting and talk about why we should vote. Think about that. We voted first, and then we'd go to the town meeting and discuss why the school needed an override, or why the fire department needed an override. And it was too late because we'd already cast our ballots, and you can't change that. It's very, very hard to do that. And so I'm thinking to myself, that's crazy. So I go to our Board of Selectmen and I say, why can't we switch those and have our town meeting first so we can educate everybody about why this is necessary, and then let them go vote with that better understanding and an explanation as to pro and con. And they said, nope, we like it this way. And then I said, okay, well, I went to the finance committee and I said the same thing to them. I'm like, don't you agree it's kind of backwards? And they said, nope, we kind of like it this way. And one of the things I haven't talked to you about that is absolutely wonderful about town meeting is not only do the selectmen and the committees bring articles to town meeting, but individuals in the community can bring articles to town meeting also. And so I went out and I got a bunch of signatures and I went to town meeting and I said, I want to talk about this. I want to bring this to the town meeting floor and see what the town meeting has to say about it, because they can overrule people. And so I made my case and I won. And ever since then, we've been doing it the other way. And the schools, and I dare say, most of the departments in town have fared better because we're able to educate people first and then vote at the polls. It's been an amazing difference. Because of how I was treated in that experience, I felt I was really disrespected. And it was very, very hard, very frustrating. And that encouraged me after that experience to run for public office. And that's when I ran for selectman. So like I said before, going to town meeting can actually begin to lay the seeds of leadership that bring you to be one of the leaders in your town. Later on, I ran for town moderator, and I've made it a point ever since then of making sure that respect is the foundational element of every town meeting that I attend and watch over. Brene Brown says that we have to live into our integrity. On that day on town meeting floor, I knew exactly what she was talking about. And you can too. If there's things that are important to you that your selectmen or powers that be aren't interested in, you can bring it to town meeting, make your case, and begin to take on your mantle of leadership and show others that the town belongs to you. Because, well, I see I'm running out of time, so I just want to wrap up with this quote if I can. Town meetings are to liberty what primary schools are to science. They bring democracy within the people's reach. They teach us how to use it. Town meeting is the beginning place of changing the way that we look at government and the way the government serves us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. Very informative, and I really enjoyed your personal stories in there too. You've had a lot of history working with this. I strongly agree with what you're saying about it, being about what you put into it. When it comes to town meeting, there's an opportunity there to really show up and be part of the conversation. And I also find it really important that you reinforce the participation of young people in town meeting. We are often hearing shock, like you expressed, at the lack of participation, but the very structure and logistics of town meeting can sometimes prevent that participation. We have lack of childcare at town meeting. That's coming up in the chat. I see we have the time of day. Sometimes towns have multiple day meetings. And then what we've seen at CCYP is the intimidation factor is very real for young people who have never participated and aren't familiar with how this works. So it becomes especially important to host events like this one, to start at the nuts and bolts and the basics and share those pieces of information that we may take for granted that everybody knows, but they really don't. So thank you so much for bringing all that up. So I want to remind everyone that we do have the chat function. There's a lot of great discussion going on in there, a lot of good questions being submitted. We will get to your questions and make sure those get addressed. And I think, Andy, do we want to take any now, or do we want to go ahead and move on to Michelle? Because I think a few of these could be addressed by Dan, but I don't want to jump ahead.
Well, I was thinking one comment that Dan could address is a question that we got in advance, which is the difference between the town meeting form or style of government and a town meeting itself, and how that works. And then, is there time where articles are put on a warrant where people don't have enough time to debate or discuss them at the select board level? So since you did such a passionate discussion about how democratic town meeting is, I wonder if you could just address that one question.
My only experience with representative town meeting is Falmouth. And Michelle can probably speak to this as well as I, but my understanding is that some of the larger towns, because of the volume of people in them, chose to go to an elected representative form of town meeting, which basically just dilutes it one level further. So people in the town vote for a representative from their area, and that person is supposed to go to town meeting and represent them. I understand why it's done. I just think that the one strength of town meeting is our ability to speak to people and speak to our elected representatives, and we delegate that right to somebody else in a representative type of meeting. Granted, representatives who run for a position like that are more inclined to show up at the town meeting, but we lose something. We lose our own voice in that process. So I've always been an advocate of keeping open town meeting and trying to find other ways to get people to come to town meeting and making access, making it more accessible. I think the second question was time. I apologize. I forget what that second question was.
No, I just asked that one at this point.
I think the other part was, people sometimes are frustrated that they come to town meeting and they feel like they're ambushed at the last second with information about an article. And you have to remember, this information has been out there for probably 3 or 4 months, if not longer. Anytime you're interested in what's going to be a town meeting, you can go on your town's website, and the warrant, it has all the articles, is going to be right there on the website. If you want to take it even a step further, I'd suggest you go and watch some of the videos of your Board of Selectmen meetings, because prior to the town meeting, lots of different committees and department heads are coming in front of the board and explaining the articles in detail so that the Board of Selectmen can take a view and take a position on the article. Finally, I just say this. There's an awful lot of citizenship that means that we have to do some of the work ahead of time ourselves. And all of this information is available. You just have to go out and seek it out. And like I said, even if you get to the meeting and you don't understand something, find somebody in the meeting that does and get your questions answered. And sometimes people like to ask questions so that the answers are in front of everybody. That's powerful too, because it points out some of the weaknesses of the article. But we have an obligation to do our homework as well. And that's how it addressed that.
Great. I think we should save the rest of the questions till after Michelle speaks, because she may answer a few of them.
Great. Well, I want to next shift gears and turn it over to Michelle, who's going to approach this a little bit from a different angle and talk with us about some of the legal issues surrounding town meeting and her perspective as an attorney. And I think Michelle, especially in light of, the chat conversation and the mention of who's involved in the structure and all of that, this whole situation that we're in right now has really turned our traditions on their head. And so we have maybe an opportunity, and it's something we talked about a bit in the planning process for this event. I know you plan to touch on that a bit, how this could be an opportunity to re-examine the structure and be more inclusive in how we run our town meetings so that there can be more participation from young people and families and anybody who maybe wouldn't currently be able to participate. But I'll turn it over to you, and you can take it from here. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Thanks, Lauren, and thank you, Dan, for your comments. Dan and I, while we did talk in advance about what we were going to cover, we did not really run through it, word by word, but a lot of what I say is going to parallel Dan's comments, but also take it a little bit from the legal perspective as well. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Life is chaotic right now, and town meeting may not seem like the most scintillating of topics, but it is so very important as we try to figure out how to do the essential business that's necessary to keep government functioning at a time when there are so many legitimate, real reasons why folks might want to just choose to stay home. And from a legal perspective, I'm going to touch upon some of the legal restrictions that are in place that make it hard to implement some of the very creative ideas we're seeing people talk about in terms of town meeting. I've seen in the chat comments about outdoor town meetings, and a lot of folks have said, can we do a Zoom town meeting? And so I'm going to cover all of those issues. And I do expect that a lot of what I say you'll hear will really parallel and amplify upon Dan's comments from earlier. So to understand why town meeting is so important now, it's good to look back a little bit on the history of town meeting, and Dan touched upon this originally. Now, I will admit, I'll confess that I am not a history buff, and there are certainly other folks that could probably wax more eloquently about the time-honored tradition that is town meeting. But at its bottom line, this has been an essential form of our of how town governs itself, dating back to the early days of our country, particularly in New England. It tends to be more of a New England tradition. And as Dan noted, you used to get fined for not going to town meeting. That's because it was a mandatory assembly of the voters, the opportunity and the obligation to come together as a group and decide matters of importance in the community. But you can easily imagine how that could prove to be a less than efficient way of operating without some structure, without some advance notice to the voters about when a town meeting was going to occur, where it was going to occur, and the topics that were going to be discussed. And it's from those issues, those concerns, that the concept of a warrant was born, i.e. a written document that warns voters who, where, when, and what. The where meeting was going to be held, what time, and the list of the topics that were going to be discussed. Significantly, from a legal perspective, only those things that are on a warrant can be discussed by town meeting. So sometimes folks will want to bring up other items that really may be well suited for a discussion and debate amongst the voters of the town. But if it's not on the warrant, it's not appropriate for discussion at town meeting. Folks may be aware, may not be aware that there is a process in state law that allows you as citizens to get a matter before the town meeting. It's called a citizen's petition. And you can certainly generally find out more information about how to do that from your town clerk. But in a nutshell, if a set number of registered voters sign a petition to get an article on the warrant, they can do that. So another way in which folks can take an active role in putting matters before town to be decided. But in the absence of those types of citizens petitions, a warrant is traditionally established and defined by the select board. Now, Dan talked a little bit about representative town meeting. There's two types of town meetings: open, where any registered voter can attend and vote, or representative town meeting, which, as Dan noted, is a process through which representatives, or called town meeting members, are elected by precinct, and they represent the precinct at town meeting, and they're the only folks that can vote. Towns can choose to move to a representative town meeting form when their population exceeds 6,000. And you have to adopt a representative form of town meeting through a charter or a special act. So those are the two distinctions between an open and a representative town meeting. Generally, otherwise, they're very similar. With a representative form of town meeting, there is a limited post-town meeting process where certain items can be put on a ballot for a vote after the fact, but that does not exist for open town meetings. Now, Dan talked about when town meeting occurs. By law, town meeting has to occur. Excuse me, I'm going. There we go. By law, town meeting has to be held between February and June. In all of my time, I've never seen town meeting occur earlier than April. And that's usually a function of all the work that goes into planning a town meeting, in particular, preparing an annual operating budget. April it tends to be the start of town meeting season. You know, tax professionals and accountants have tax meeting season. We have town meeting season, and that usually runs through the end of June, because, as Dan mentioned, one of the most important things that town meeting does is vote the annual operating school budget and other budgets for the upcoming fiscal year, which starts July 1. Now, there is a lot of work that goes into getting to the point where we're ready to go to the voters at town meeting to vote on whether it's the budget, adoption of bylaws, or any other similar matter. As Dan suggested, Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, library trustees, any other board or committee in town, they're holding meetings governed by the open meeting law where they're discussing whether it's their budget or other items that they want to put before town meeting for consideration. It can be large-scale building projects. It can be an adoption of bylaws, whether general or zoning bylaws. All of these things occur prior to town meeting. And so watching and keeping an eye out for those local discussions that precede town meeting can be a good way to stay informed about the topics that are going to actually be discussed at town meeting. Finance Committee and Selectmen, Select Board are the two boards that generally deal most significantly with the budget, but those discussions, as I said, have to occur during meetings covered under the open meeting law, and advance notice of those discussions should be available to folks through looking at their agendas. I know in my town, I signed up for email alerts, and I get an alert every time a new agenda is posted on the town's website. Now, I will confess that I often delete those emails because they come at such a clip that I'm probably getting 2 or 3 a day. But that's a way in which I can choose to keep myself informed about what the town is talking about, what our elected officials and appointed officials are considering. I also, for the towns that I represent, I also get those same alerts so that I can look at the agendas to see what the boards and committees in the towns that I work with, what they're talking about, so that I'm informed as to what topics might come up at town meeting or in anticipation of the finalization of the warrant. Now, why should I participate in town meeting? Dan talked about sort of the important work that town meeting does, but I particularly like this quote from a newspaper in Maine. It's over 25 years old, and you know, as we've discussed throughout the program so far, even in normal times, participation in government, whether it be attendance at town meeting or even voting at local, state, or federal elections, the majority of registered voters just don't do that. And while we have seen pre-pandemic an increase in civic engagement over the past several years, you know, we are sort of in a holding pattern right now because of the various restrictions on our participation in outdoor or outside large group gatherings because of the current state of emergency. So why go to town meeting now at a time when, as I said earlier, there's probably a lot of really good reasons to just stay home? And this quote from the newspaper really, in Maine, really gets to the gist of it. It is participatory democracy. You show up, you sit on those hard metal folding chairs, or in some instances you get a nicer cushioned chair because you're in a newer high school auditorium, for example. You listen to the debate. You listen to folks make a pitch in support of an article to explain why they think you should vote a certain way. You can weigh in if you want. You can speak your piece. You listen to your fellow neighbors, and you vote on what you think is right. And not to offend anybody who is an avid social media user, but posting something on the internet, on Facebook, or through some other social media means is not the same as actually participating in your government. And I tend to see that a lot of folks express opinions on sort of the unofficial town Facebook pages, for example. But you know what? If you really want to make a difference, you show up to town meeting and you vote on the articles and you make your pitches as to why you think certain actions should or shouldn't be taken. Now, a couple of legal pieces and then some practical pieces about how we hold town meeting during a pandemic. As you are surely aware, the governor has a ban in effect on gatherings of more than 10 people. It does not apply to town meetings. So technically, more than 10 people could get together for purposes of holding town meeting. But when we talk about how we're going to do that and do that safely, a lot of ideas are being discussed, whether it's outdoor town meetings, virtual town meetings, you know, having sort of a virtual Zoom pre-town meeting where all the articles are discussed but not voted on, and then allowing people to vote by a mail-in ballot on those individual articles. There simply is no legal authorization for us to do that. You can't hold a virtual town meeting. Unlike the temporary authorization that exists right now that allows public boards to hold virtual public meetings or public hearings, there isn't an ability right now to do that for town meeting. Some of you may be aware that there is legislation pending right now, emergency legislation that would apply only during this current state of emergency that might allow a virtual town meeting. What we've seen so far is that that's limited to a representative town meeting, and I don't know what's going to pass. I don't know if and or when it's going to pass. There isn't nothing that I'm aware of that's being discussed at the legislative level at the State House that would allow for a sort of mail-in vote by ballot for town meeting warrant articles. So there are some significant limitations in place. Generally speaking, town meeting is an in-person event, and how we do that now is absolutely the subject of ongoing, frequent discussions between all of your local town officials, the moderator, the police department, town clerk, all folks at the town government level are talking ongoing, incessantly, really, almost every day, about how it is that we can possibly conduct a town meeting while observing the social distancing and safety protocols that are in place. It's requires all of us to not only be creative, but also to be flexible and to be cooperative, be patient. That's probably one of the hardest things to do right now. When we talk about holding town meeting, you're probably hearing in your community that there's a number of times that are talked about, well, maybe the end of June. Why are we even holding it all? Well, up until this current pandemic, we were legally required to hold a town meeting by the end of June. And if we didn't do that, and we didn't have a budget in place before the start of the new fiscal year, we couldn't run government. You may have recall at various times the federal government shutdowns and federal employees are furloughed because the Congress can't vote on a budget. Well, if we didn't vote on a budget by June 30th, we would be in the same position come July 1st. In light of the pandemic, there has been some emergency legislation put in place that will allow us now and moving forward, in the event of a crisis of this nature, a public health safety emergency, to, if we can't get to town meeting by June 30th, that there'll be some temporary authorization to allow government to continue to run, but basically almost at a level funded level on a month-to-month basis. But the fact of the matter is, we have to have town meeting at some point, because we have to finally adopt a budget. Not to go too deep into municipal finance, but there's a variety of things that flow after the adoption of an annual budget, not the least of which is setting of the tax rate. So town meeting has to happen at some point. And since we don't have the ability to do it virtually, and we don't have the ability legally at this point to vote on anything by a mail-in ballot, for example, this is where the creativity comes in terms of figuring out how we're going to do this. It's a town-by-town consideration, because people look at the average number of voters that turn out at town meeting to figure out, where are we going to put these people 6 to 10 feet apart now? How are we going to, what kind of facility do we need? How large a facility? Do we need to change our location to a larger room or a larger hall than what we normally would? Even expecting that there's going to be likely fewer voters that turn out now than might in an average year, we still are likely going to need larger space capacity, because again, keeping folks 6 to 10 feet apart increases our overall the size of the location. What arrangements do we need to make before town meeting? You know, we are talking about things as basic as, how are we going to clean the room? When are we going to clean the room? The tables, the chairs. Are we going to have hand sanitizer present? Are we going to have face masks present? Because of course the governor's face mask order is in effect right now, and it's not preempted because this is town meeting. Can we have those on hand? Do we have enough? Do we have enough for our workers? Every voter that comes to town meeting needs to be checked in before you are allowed to enter town meeting, just like at an election. How do we do that? You know, everyone I'm sure is used to now seeing the lines at Home Depot or the grocery store, you know, 6 feet apart. Every person is waiting in line outside, and there's timed entries, or there's a capacity entries based on capacity, so that if when one person leaves, another person is allowed to enter. Well, we're having to think about that right now. If that's the way we may need to get folks in, get them checked in, and do that in a manner that respects the social distancing and safety protocols. We need to protect our workers as well. The generally 2 or 3 people that are at a table when you go into the gym auditorium or wherever your town meeting is normally held to check in voters. Maybe you're going to see plexiglass shields now, like you do at the grocery store at the checkout. These are all of the things that we talk about on a daily basis, and your local officials are talking about, to figure out how we can make this work. A lot of folks have said, look, can we just put it off to the fall? And I'm not a doctor, but I'm sure I'm seeing the same news and information that you are, that suggests that if we don't get a handle on this, we may be in a worse position in the fall. And so it's very challenging for us right now to figure out when is the right time to hold town meeting. And so, I appreciate that folks are very cognizant of safety, both personally as voters, but also your local officials are really mindful of trying to minimize, to the extent that we can, the risk to personal health and safety, because we know we have to get town meeting done sometime, and we just don't have the crystal ball to tell us when that perfect time is going to be. One of the things that towns have been shifting towards before our current state of emergency, but you may see more discussion about right now, is electronic voting. In the towns that I go to their town meeting that use electronic voting, I love it. It takes usually 1 to 2 meetings for folks to get used to it. But it really does speed things along for town meeting. For folks who've never been to town meeting, usually votes are by show of hands or by a voice, yay or nay. And the moderator has the authority to declare whether that vote passes. But there's instances where a counted vote needs to be taken. In some instances, a paper ballot vote may be needed. And so those things require, in a pandemic where we're worried about transmission of a disease that some say can happen through contact on things like paper and pens, how do we do this, right? So electronic voting is a way that we can try and minimize some of those risks, because it would eliminate the need to distribute paper ballots, reduces the need to have people physically counting votes. And so I have at least 1 or 2 towns that have never done electronic voting, but they are thinking about doing that for this town meeting, because precisely to try and reduce the different aspects to town meeting that might create another risk to the voters. People who go to town meeting are going to need to be flexible too, right? You're probably going to be told to wear a face mask. This is a question that's being debated, every minute pretty much right now. The governor's order, as I mentioned earlier, requires you to wear face masks out when you're out of your house if social distancing is not possible. But we're debating the question about whether in each town, whether there's going to be a requirement that folks wear masks, whether or not there's going to be separate areas for folks who refuse to wear masks. You'll probably be asked to review documentation that's usually made available at town meeting. You walk in, you check in, you pick up not only a copy of the warrant, but there's usually a series of informational documents that relate to specific warrant articles, and you pick them up. And to avoid sort of that contact, you may be asked to educate yourself in advance and take advantage of what documentation is available online at the town's website and read that in advance, so that we don't necessarily have to have as much paper passed around and passed out at town meeting. And again, you may be asked to arrive at different times for town meetings so that we can limit the flow. We can try to move things along in a manner that doesn't keep everybody clustered in a line, in a waiting room, in the hallway at the same time while we're going through the check-in process. But regardless of how much we plan for this, until the first town meeting occurs under these circumstances, and I'm not aware of any town meeting that has happened yet this season. I'm usually knee deep in it by now. My town meetings generally start the very beginning of April. But I am not aware of any town that has actually held a town meeting this spring season yet. So until that happens, we're guessing quite a bit about how we can do it and what things don't work and what things do work. And that's why cooperation and patience and flexibility is really important right now. And I'll emphasize on the patience piece. I've heard the term quarantine fatigue, being sort of thrown around a lot right now. And I get that, because I think we're all fatigued by this. And I do expect that folks at town meeting you know, there may be folks that are a little more stressed than normal, a little more sensitive, a little more concerned about being in large crowds, perhaps even a little testy. And so I think we all have to go into a town meeting recognizing that there's going to be some adjustments that we all need to make in terms of how we're going to do town meeting.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm being told that we need to move on to Q&A here pretty soon. So
yep, absolutely. My last slide is just some resources for
great.
folks.
Thank you so
they wanted
much.
to take a look at some more information about town meeting.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Great compliment to everything that Dan shared. And I know we have a lot of people in the chat box that are ready to submit their questions. So I'm going to pull in Andy Genser of Cape Women's Coalition, and we will start to tackle these. So Andy.
Okay, here's my idea, since we've got a whole slew of questions. I've been listening and grouping them. So I think I want to start with some of the questions that are more general about town meeting in general, and then move into, there's a host of questions around access and childcare and getting younger folks to come. And then there's a whole host of questions that are more about this moment in time and how do we ensure safety and do we wipe down the microphones and what about gloves and masks. So in the first group of questions, I want to ask, a question's been raised about the legal debate around the open meeting law. So this one's really for Michelle. To just sort of clarify the role, how does town meeting fit with the open meeting law, and what's the debate about that? Can you explain that a little bit to folks?
Sure, thanks. So it's clear in the open meeting law that town meeting is not covered. And in the past, in years past, if a quorum of a board, whether it be a select board, a planning board, a zoning board, thought that they might have to have some discussion amongst a quorum at town meeting and arrive at a particular decision, which doesn't happen very often, but it's theoretically possible. We used to say you would need to simultaneously post a meeting, which is better practice, to simultaneously post a board meeting concurrent with town meeting. Now, the open meeting law was extensively rewritten in 2010. And when that happened, when that rewrite happened, there was express provision made for the fact that that did not need to occur, that best practice that we had generally advised of concurrently posting a meeting under the open meeting law with town meeting was specifically addressed in the legislative rewrite to the open meeting law back in 2010. So I have to confess that I'm not aware of much more debate about that since that time. If you think about what the open meeting law does, it provides you advance notice of what topics are going to be debated, but it doesn't require that everybody be provided with all of the information in advance of a meeting. Town meeting actually gives you more notice than what the open meeting law would require, because your warrants need to be posted generally 14 days before town meeting for an annual, and 7 days before the annual and 14 days before a special. Whereas town meeting only requires 48 hours open meeting law only requires 48 hours of posting of notices in advance. And even matters that aren't on an agenda under the open meeting law in certain circumstances could be discussed. So the processes that are in place governing town meeting actually provide folks with more advance notice of when, where, and what are going to be discussed than the open meeting law.
And also, it sounds like a couple of people have mentioned in different ways in the chat, and Dan and you both mentioned this too, that it's all up to all of us to do our homework, to read the stuff that comes out. I know I see the warrant and I get like my eyes glaze over. So, you know, I get that. What you're saying is it's out there. It's just up to us to, I don't know, put it under our pillow and maybe it'll all seep into our heads or something in advance. But okay, thank you for that one. And then another question for either of you is the question about town meeting costs, that it costs more than most people think to hold a town meeting. And why is that? What is it? what does it cost, and is there any comparison of costs in different Cape towns? And I know you touched on the electronic devices question, which of course would raise the cost, but do either of you have information about costs of the town meetings?
So I'll just type in, I'm not aware of any comparison. I know that I would say that town meeting, my guess is that it costs a little less than elections, because there's legal requirements for the number of workers, and depending on the type of election that you're holding, you may need more workers. So, but the costs tend to be sort of the basic things that you could imagine. The cost of preparing a warrant, it's a document that then has to get posted, or in some communities, mailed to every voter. So there's costs associated with actually compiling that information. There may be arrangements that need to be made. Some towns have to rent their audio or visual equipment, whether it's the speakers, meaning the microphones, or whether they have actual PowerPoints or other visual presentations. Sometimes they have to rent that equipment. And I think now we're going to have additional costs where we're looking at having, hand sanitizer and wipes for the microphones, and, extra deep cleaning of rooms if we're going to actually hold a town meeting in rooms. And note that if we have an overflow capacity, in normal times, we'd have to have a second room with an assistant moderator and a complete hookup, at least audio hookup in that second room. And that doesn't happen in a lot of communities frequently, but I think here we're talking about that as almost a requirement, or likely to be needed now, because we may need to have a separate room where folks who either don't feel comfortable being in the larger room, have an option to go. And so that's another way in which there can be an added cost.
Mm-hmm. Anything you wanted to add to that, Dan?
Oh, just that I think the added costs of a town meeting often entail a lot of the department heads on overtime needing to be present at the meeting. As Michelle said, the cost of the electronic voting tabulators are really quite high. I've seen estimates of $40,000 to $50,000. We were trying to get our county to purchase a large amount of them so that the towns could schedule their meetings in a staggered fashion, so that we could all try to share the costs. But that, and just all the preparation that goes into video and sound and personnel that come in and set up and break down a meeting are the major costs for consideration.
Okay. This other question came in about what if there's no quorum at a town meeting? What happens?
That's a great question, because towns deal with that differently. Because we've had such difficulty getting people to town meeting in Yarmouth, probably about 15 years ago, we did away with the quorum requirement. So we could have a meeting in Yarmouth with 10 people. Normally, the least number of people I've seen in a meeting that I've attended has been somewhere around 150. But there are towns that have a quorum requirement, and if it was, say, 300 people, and somewhere during the night it dropped down, people had left after the article that they were interested was passed, they leave the meeting and it drops below 300, they actually have to stop the meeting. And oftentimes you'll see people making calls trying to get people to come in, or the meeting can be continued to another evening. But many towns have done away with the quorum, but it is certainly something to be considered, and guarantees to people that, 10 or 15, 50 people aren't making decisions for a town of 25,000.
Yeah. So that speaks to one other question that I saw here, which is, given that in many towns less than 10% of people attend, the question was, isn't it easy for an interest group to pack the meeting and get their issue passed?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
what
It
do you
happens
say about
every
that?
year. I've seen golf come in and overpower a meeting. The schools will oftentimes pack a meeting. And as soon as that article about the school budget is over, you see this mass exodus, which as a moderator drives me crazy, because if you're interested enough in the school budget, you should be interested enough in all of the other business that's going on in town. But that does happen. And the only way to curb that is to try to encourage other people to come to town meeting. Earlier, people talked about, methods of trying to increase participation. We have offered childcare, and we oftentimes will delegate the school to that purpose to see if the PACs and PTOs can provide childcare. I moved our town meeting from a weeknight to a Saturday so that our senior citizens could feel a little bit more comfortable about driving to a meeting and not being caught in the dark. And secondly, because I thought it would be a great idea for parents who are working sometimes 2 jobs and trying to take care of kids and juggle everything, I thought a Saturday might be a little bit easier for them. Unfortunately, it didn't work, and we just recently moved our meeting back to a Monday. I think towns everywhere are striving to find ways to encourage more people to come, but we're dealing with a very fragmented society. The electronic virtual meeting is a really great idea, and it's one of the things that's coming out of this virus situation that I think is going to play a large role in town meeting in the future. The difficulty with that is trying to validate who's on the other end. How do you check them in? How do you make sure that the person on the other end is actually a registered voter? And then handling the volume. But I think those problems are all achievable, and I think probably by the end of this pandemic that we might have some push in that direction. And then I think you'll see a real jump in voter participation, which I think benefits all of us. People can still come if they want, but if they want to stay home, they can do it via remote.
Quick question about, and then I want to move to the childcare, a little bit more about access. I think you answered this question earlier, but I want to clarify. Can town meeting create a new town position and fund that position? And the way I heard your discussion, that if it's not on the warrant, the answer is no. So I want to clarify, is that true?
That's correct.
No.
But there's caveats all over the place with that. So town meeting's role is to legislate, i.e. adopt local bylaws, and to appropriate. They can appropriate money for a new town position. Now, every town has different rules about how you might go about to do that, and there may be prerequisites that have to occur, whether it be consideration by a personnel board in advance of the town meeting to make a recommendation on it. All of the procedural steps may vary from town to town. But theoretically, a citizen petition could say, could request that there be an article put on the warrant to say, I move that the town, to see if the town will vote to create a new town administrative position and fund it. Well, town meeting can vote to appropriate money for a position. They can't mandate that any particular position be filled, because that resides with the executive, with the select board, or the appointing authority if it's a different department.
So we have a bunch of questions where the answer is, it depends, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the question about younger people attending, parents attending, Dan, you just talked about moving your meeting to Saturdays, providing childcare. I know Chatham, and I know we've got folks from Chatham here, has moved stuff around, tried some creative things. I know in my town of Brewster, they moved the meeting even back an hour, and that made a big difference. Some of these meetings go to 11 o'clock at night. Nobody wants their kids up that. But I know there's people on the call who somebody had asked Florence from Chatham to comment on what they've done on that matter. I don't know if you want to say anything, Florence. Otherwise, I want to keep this moving, but.
I think what I might add to this conversation is that one of my strongest passions has been trying to go out to the schools and to talk to parents and to the teachers and to create mock town meetings to encourage the classes to come into town meeting. Charter Lighthouse School has been very innovative in this way. They actually have their 8th graders attend a town meeting, choose an article, and have to write a paper on it. And they have to talk with a town representative of some kind. So I've tried to get our public schools to do that. I've been unsuccessful so far, but I've gone to them and had mock town meetings. I go to the teachers and really just encourage everybody that I can to bring the young people in, because as I think Michelle mentioned before, or Lauren actually, we're seeing an uptick in our younger people who are really starting to get passionate and engaged again. And we want to build on that. And so it really starts at the school level and teaching them and encouraging them being a part of the town meeting. And we have to do whatever it takes to make that happen. Providing childcare, but does it, you know, everybody's concerned about, you know, who's watching my kids? Have they been vetted? You know, and how long these meetings go on. Sometimes meetings can go on all night and into the next night. So it takes some real partnership. You have to perhaps find people that you can pool your resources so that somebody's watching your kids that you feel safely so you can attend. Or split, one partner takes the kids and one partner goes and represents your family. But, you know, we have to take an active role in re-educating our young people and frankly, our older people too, to come to town meeting and take their voice back. Because as I said before, the meetings happen anyway. And democracy was meant so that our representatives were answerable to us, not the other way around. And so if you don't go to town meeting, if you don't make the priority and the arrangements ahead of time, then you really are forfeiting your ability to make any change in your local community.
Thanks.
Andy, I'm sorry,
Yep.
I just want to add one thing. You know, if childcare is the reason why you're not going to town meeting, then you need to make your officials aware of that, because if they don't know that that's impacting a significant percentage of the voters, as opposed to it simply being apathy, quite frankly, then they're not going to look at whether they can afford or how they could structure childcare. So if it's an issue for you, the only way that folks know about that is if that's raised, and that's to the folk, to whether it be the administrator or the board of selectmen. And you know, I frequently get asked about how we might structure childcare at town meeting, and there's ways to do it, and it probably includes a waiver of liability or something along those lines that gets signed by parents. But you know, it can be done. It's just a matter of figuring out if that's enough people need it, and that's where resources are going to be devoted to try to make that work.
Okay, and I just want to encourage everyone to read the comments on the chat, because a lot of people have made some really interesting comments that answer some of these questions. But knowing that we're moving out of time, I want to move to these questions about the virtual meetings and outdoor town meeting, and a whole host of sets of questions about that. So this is sort of a question / comment, and it says, you know, in many towns, the select board meetings are held virtually. So wondering if any towns are having in-person meetings, and how hard it is to think about a live town meeting when the select board isn't meeting live. So I think that's maybe sort of a comment, perhaps not a question.
But I can just address that briefly, and if you want.
Sure.
You know, there's a governor's order that actually temporarily during the state of emergency allows for public bodies to, like select boards or other local boards and committees to hold virtual meetings. There isn't anything like that for town meeting. I absolutely understand that there's an inherent tension in trying to move forward with an in-person gathering of 100 or more people at the same time when much smaller groups are opting to use virtual town meetings. And I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but I think it is with a fair amount of optimism that folks are thinking that we're going to get town meetings done in June. We have to shoot for a target, but it's a daily evaluation about whether that is going to be really feasible. And you know, again, we can't just say we're not going to do a town meeting, and we can't just say, well, we'll do it at the end of the year. It should be safe by December. And so it's a very delicate balance of trying to figure out when we could possibly hold it, where we don't have the option to hold it virtually. But you know, I think it's a matter where we're all just have to stay tuned and see if it really can work. But where you have the option to do virtual meetings, such as under the open meeting law, that's why folks are taking advantage of that.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I just want to say to everyone is that the chat questions and comments will be posted when we post the video of this. So you'll see there's some really great comments on there that I think are really, really answers to some of the questions and really helpful. We know that Orleans is talking about doing an outdoor town meeting. And they raised, and I'm not sure any of us have the answers to these questions, but I'm just going to verbalize them because I'm sure they're the things where a lot of us are thinking about, you know, well, first of all, what about a bad weather plan? Because we know we don't have perfect weather here. But also, what are the safety precautions? How about sharing of the microphone? Are people going to all be wearing masks and gloves? And what about the restrooms? And, you know, yada, yada, yada. I mean, there's just 1,000,001 safety questions about holding these town meetings in person, whether they're inside or outside. I don't know if there's anything more for Dan or Michelle to say about that, but there's a whole bunch of questions and comments about that. So I just wanted to phrase them.
I lost the connection for a moment, but I know my town currently is talking about postponing. We're scheduled for June 22nd, and the moderator has the ability to postpone for up to 30 days. And we're talking about postponing into the summer at some point. I think what we'll end up doing is identifying a couple of buildings inside and setting up the infrastructure so that we have the ability to space people appropriately. That requires us to have an assistant moderator so that the votes can be taken in the second building. We have to have a communication device so that questions from one building can be communicated to the floor of the other building. So it's a bit of a logistical tangle to solve, but and then having a large enough staff on hand to make sure that the building is clean enough and is constantly taking care of mics and restrooms and plenty of product and masks available to keep people safe. The challenging thing with town meetings is that the majority of people who are going are over 60. And so we have to be extremely sensitive to that and put whatever protective measures we can in place to ensure that they can come to meeting and participate, but feel confident in their safety.
And just to add to Dan's comment, one of the things that I'm recommending to every town that I'm having this discussion with is that in advance of town meeting, when you figured out what your plan is, you need to publicize that so that folks know and can understand what safety precautions are being put in place and what they're going to be asked to do when they get to town meeting, whether it's face masks, whether it's you know, having separate rooms, to just really advise folks so that they can have some measure of comfort that we've thought about all these things and here's our plan to address them. And as an aside, at the start of the pandemic, because I thought I was going to be actually going to town meetings before now, I literally wiped out Target of wipes because I planned to be coming to my town meeting with, you know, a canister of wipes and wiping down the mic, you know, every time. And that's what I'm telling towns to do. Have you talked with your sound people to make sure that they're comfortable that there's a way to sanitize the mic after each use? And what are we going to tell people to do? And so we are thinking about those things. And my hope is that as we move forward to actually having an in-person town meeting, whenever that is, at some point, that your community will have published in advance what the safety precautions are, what we're doing, so that folks do feel more comfortable about showing up.
Thank you so much, Michelle and Dan, for addressing those questions. Thanks for everybody who submitted questions and comments. Really appreciate your engagement. And I think one of the key takeaways here is that engagement is everything. So there's not a silver bullet. There's not a one, you know, way, as Andy said, to put the Warren under your pillow and absorb it all. It's more complex than that. And clearly Currently, in the environment that we're living in, there's additional complexities that have to be considered. So having your voice included in those processes to make those decisions of what town meeting will look like moving forward is the most key part, because we can't give up on making sure that everybody's heard and included in that process and making adjustments where we need to. So thank you all again, and I want to now turn it over to Sue to wrap us up on behalf of Cape Women's Coalition. Thank you for having CCYP and for making this collaboration possible. We're really pleased.
Well, thank you, Lauren, and thanks to you and CCYP for collaborating and you for moderating. I agree, town meeting is a wonderful institution. There's that old saying, government is by those who show up. And so it's very important to show up. But it sounds like, excuse me, that we do need to find some ways to make it easier for people to participate, whether it be Zoom, the chat has been wonderful, childcare, and I think that through all the work that people are doing to make town meeting be able to happen during the pandemic, that we'll come up with some solutions that we can work with in the long term. So thanks to all of you who came and participated and made wonderful chat comments. And thanks so much to Dan and Michelle for all of your work in preparing for this and such a great job in explaining lots of things to us.